Hello everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer. I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We live in a world that is a collage of contrasts. If we choose, we can see beauty and goodness everywhere we turn. Also, if we choose, we can see ugliness and evil everywhere we turn. We are looking at the same world, but we can see opposites, depending on what we wish to see. This perhaps is something unique to human beings. It is possible, even likely, that no other life form on our planet has this remarkable ability to look at life and the world and to see such radically different perspectives. This ability has two sources. One is in the world itself, which contains both of these contrasting images. It is not difficult to see terrible things in the world. Nature itself is filled with killing and death and a brutal struggle to survive. But it is also filled with life and wonder and the miracle of existence. The other source is the human mind, that largely undiscovered treasure house of thoughts, emotions, choices, and beliefs. The mind can flip in a moment's notice from love to hatred, from grief to joy, from deep concern to passive apathy, from spacing out to concentrated thinking, from giving up to unencumbered will. It is all right there in the mind, blessing and curse, life and death, good and evil. God granted us this divine power to shape our own image of the world. If we have such a power, why don't we use it more often to our benefit? Why aren't we constantly enriching our lives with joy and wonder, with goodness and purpose? Why do we allow ourselves to perpetually drift into states of boredom and meaninglessness? This is a difficult question to answer, but it must be answered. This week's Parsha is called Shemot. That simple sounding word means names. That equally simple sounding word opens the second book of the Bible, Exodus. Genesis, or creation, told the story of the formation of the world and the foundational stages of the human search for God and for purpose. It ended with the family drama of Jacob and his sons making their way to Egypt to live there to survive the famine in Canaan. Exodus opens with the names of those sons, the 12 men who would be the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. But their springtime in Egypt had come to an end. Though the exact chronology is unclear in the text, at some point the children of Israel were enslaved by their Egyptian overlords. This slavery became memorialized in the Bible and has become one of the primary themes in literature and song. In a sense, it came to represent all future oppression in much of the world that inherited this story as part of their own history. This enslavement and the miraculous movement to end it and free the Israelites forms the core of the first half of Exodus. Let my people go is the almost universal cry of all oppressed peoples. It came about largely through the efforts of one man, Moses. This person, one of the most influential in the history of humanity, is of course the central figure in the rest of the Torah. He led the movement to free the Israelites and to forge them into a cohesive nation with core foundational beliefs. He was the prophet of God and the instrument through which God worked the greatest recorded miracles in history. Yet he came a hair's breadth away from not surviving infancy. He was born during a decree by the Egyptian Pharaoh to drown all male Israelite newborn babies. His mother hid him for a few months and then placed him in a box to float on the river. His sister Miriam watched to see what would be his fate. It happened that he was spotted by none other than the daughter of Pharaoh, who took him into her own household and raised him. She even had him brought back to his mother to nurse him. When he was brought back to Pharaoh's daughter after being weaned, she gave him the name Moshe, hinting that he was drawn out of the water. Moshe was raised in the royal household and only accidentally discovered his true origins as a Hebrew. He saw the oppression of the Hebrews and understood that they were his people. After an attempt to rectify some of this, he had to flee Egypt to save his own life. He found refuge in Midian, across the Sinai Peninsula. He lived with a priest named Jethro and married one of his daughters, Zipporah, who gave birth to his first son. While all this was happening, the Torah tells us the oppression was reaching a kind of crescendo. The cries of the Hebrews somehow made their way to God. Instead of passively letting things play out, God took an active role in things. God knew that a moment of destiny had arrived, the time to redeem the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. At this point, the story takes a strange twist. Moshe goes out wandering in the wilderness with Jethro's sheep. He came to the mountain of God, traditionally identified as Mount Sinai. There, an angel appeared to him in the form of a burning bush. Moshe saw that the bush burned but was not consumed. He decided to take a closer look at this amazing sight, why the bush was not consumed by the fire. Precisely then, the Torah states, God saw that he had turned to see, and God called to him from the bush and said, Moshe, Moshe. Moshe answered, I am here. God then said, do not come closer. Remove your shoes from your feet, for the place you are standing on is holy ground. This voice then told him who exactly it was that was speaking from this bush. It was the God of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moshe hid his face out of fear, but God continued to speak. God instructed Moshe that he was to be the agent through which the freeing of the Israelites would take place. They were to be brought back to the land that was promised to their ancestors. Moshe was to be the instrument of God in bringing all this to fruition. This was his moment of destiny. Instead of grasping it eagerly, he tried to back out, saying that he was not fit for such a monumental task. After a long dialogue in which God managed to convince Moshe that he indeed was the person of the hour and that he would have the assistance of God every step of the way, Moshe had his mission set out for him. He would be joined by his brother Aaron, who would be the chief spokesman of the project. But the real burden of bringing the Exodus to completion fell on Moshe's shoulders. It was to him whom God called from the bush. It is interesting that the decision to select Moshe stemmed ultimately from the fact that God saw that he turned to see. This simple phrase illuminates what really happened. Moshe could have walked away. He could have simply ignored the bush or glanced at it and went back to his everyday life. But he didn't. He noticed the strange sight and he turned to look. This is what God saw, that he turned to look. This was all that was necessary. Next, got him to approach no closer, but to remove his shoes, since, quote, the place you are standing on is holy ground. It isn't clear what made this ground particularly holy at this moment, but it is probably a safe bet to say that it's something to do with the presence of God in the bush and Moshe's willingness to see the wondrous sight. But what's with the shoes? Is there some rule that shoes must be removed when standing on holy ground? Perhaps there is. But it is equally possible that something else is going on here. The shoes were Moshe's connection to walking on by and getting back to real life. As long as they were on, he had one foot out of the proverbial door. To stand on holy ground, one must be ready to become immersed in holiness. It will not do to be thinking about lunch or getting back home or anything else, for that matter. To see what is holy requires a singular vision. This perhaps is the portal to this entire story and the understanding of why Moshe was chosen for this task. He was the one who turned to look. It is possible that burning bushes are all around us, but we simply don't take the time to notice them. Even if by some miracle we manage to spot one of these things, we rarely make the effort to really immerse ourselves in the moment. We go our merry way and forget about the whole thing. Moshe didn't do this. He turned to see, and then he removed his shoes. There is no other way to become holy and to speak to God. Perhaps every single one of us could occasionally see burning bushes if we simply took the time and spent the effort to notice. Bushes are amazing things, as are mountains and clouds, oceans and rocks, bugs and stars. They all have a fire within them, the fire of God. In some things, the fire is more evident, but it is still easy to ignore. In others, it is almost impossible to see, no matter how much we try. But it is there in everything. This is the fire of existence, and it is all around us and within us. It is simply a matter of turning to see and taking off one's shoes. The human mind is a truly remarkable thing. It can detect the presence of God in something as trivial as a bush. It can see it as a fire burning, and yet the bush is not consumed. It can turn to look at this wonder and be astounded or mystified or taken up by an aura of holiness. It can do all this while walking in a park or sitting on a chair somewhere. But it can also spend an entire lifetime never noticing such a thing. Even more, it can detect something like this and simply walk away as if there is nothing worth noticing, or find something more important to occupy its time. This is also remarkable. We have this ability to perceive God's reality and the parallel ability to not be interested. What a piece of work is man. Perhaps it wouldn't be the worst advice in the world to suggest that we make some attempt to notice holiness in the world. When we are fortunate enough to see it, perhaps we should pay attention and not drift back to the latest feed on the phone. It may be a life-changing experience. We may not hear God speak to us, but it's good to know that God is there nevertheless. Shabbat Shalom.